Welcome back. We're back at Capitol Dateline with our Inside Florida Politics crew. All right, so now we're going to turn our focus to Congress. Always a fun show. 400 folks show up to D.C. to do the will of the people. But first, before they have to get there, they got to win their campaigns. So let's start in Miami. Mary Ellen, this is your backyard. A couple of races are big down there. What's going on?
Yeah, it's a shuffleboard a little bit because we've got the same candidates we've seen for a while. We've got Ileana Ros-Lehtinen, and she's got a brand new district in many ways. She's an icon in Miami politics, and yet she has to run a lot more aggressively because she's got a Democratic opponent, and she's got to remind people that she's been here a while. So that's an interesting one. Then we've got the other race that I think is it's perceived by many to be a toss-up, and that is the rematch between Congressman Carlos Curbelo and Joe Garcia, who was the previous congressman who was unseated 2 years ago by Curbelo, and they're coming back, and that's going to be a tough race. And that again is a toss-up district in many ways because of redistricting.
Right, but that's also back to that same theme of kind of that old conservative Cuban population and that new Puerto Rican, Mexican population that's really on the fence on both sides of that race.
Yeah, and there are a lot more Hispanics that are non-Cuban that have moved into both of those districts. There's also a lot of more African Americans in the districts and more Democrats. They both have to appeal to the middle of the road a lot more, and the result is that both of them have said they're not going to vote for Donald Trump.
Mm-hmm. So we're going to move a little far northward. We'll stay tuned for Miami, but let's go up to West Palm. So Congressman Murphy, now running for Senate, his open seat.
Right.
So what's going on there, John?
Well, it's a battle for this district that goes from northern Palm Beach County up through the Treasure Coast. It's a Democrat Randy Perkins versus Republican Brian Mast. And that's a tough battle with the national parties both weighing in it. And it's a district that leans Republican. So that may give Mast a little bit of an advantage going forward toward November.
All right, well, as we look at that, now let's go over to a celebrity race, right? Former Governor Charlie Crist running against Congressman Jolly. It's all your backyard.
Okay,
What's
thanks.
going on
Yeah,
there, Steve?
Brett. Well, if there's one place in the state, and maybe only one place, where the Charlie Crist name is still golden, it has to be St. Petersburg and Pinellas County. Democrat Charlie Crist against Republican Congressman David Jolly, who's been identified repeatedly as the most vulnerable incumbent in Congress in the United States. The numbers in that district are very favorable for a Democrat. I suspect we're going to see a lot of images going down the stretch of Charlie Crist and President Barack Obama. So if you think back a few years ago to the hug, the famous hug that did Charlie Crist in when he ran for the United States Senate, well, that hug is now golden for Charlie Crist because President Obama's poll numbers are trending upward. Pinellas County is trending very slightly in a Democratic direction, but Charlie Crist has enormous name ID. And my last point, Brad, is that we're seeing unprecedented, rampant turnover in the Florida congressional delegation like we've never seen before. And there's a who are these guys aspect to this congressional delegation, because when they go and are sworn in January, you're likely to have names in the delegation like John Rutherford, Randy Perkins, Val Demings, Matt Gaetz, Neil Dunn. Some of the names I just described are people who are heavily favored to win in November. But these are not, the days of Claude Pepper and Dante Fascell are long, long gone in the state. And Charlie Crist is going to be one of the most familiar faces in a congressional district of unknowns.
Wow. And just as an addition, I think it's fascinating because this is not just normal term limits, and there isn't term limits for Congress. So this isn't just people deciding. It is a complete result of redistricting and the fact that the courts drew the map.
Well, that's a great point. Let's talk about redistricting. And while there might not be a contested race, Jim, I'm coming to you. Let's talk about former Congress lady Corinne Brown and now potentially the new Congressman Lawson.
Well, that I think is the poster child for the redistricting changes. I mean, Corinne Brown had this district that everybody thought was gerrymandered for 20-some years. It went from Jacksonville to Orlando, and then the court redrew the district to go from Jacksonville over to Gadsden County, which is west of Tallahassee, and it didn't help that she's under federal indictment, but Al Lawson beat her pretty soundly. Al Lawson's a former state senator, and he did very well out here in the western part of the district, and held his own enough in Jacksonville, but she was defeated after she was elected the first time in 1992. So that's a long time to be in Congress, to be an incumbent and lose. And I think that's probably the easiest example to show people of the redistricting. I mean, Steve alluded to, talked about the Crist Jolly race. That's another good example of how redistricting is affecting things. But that Brown defeat was a big deal. I mean, she is an institution in Jacksonville. She has been for 30 years.
Yeah. It's ironic that the biggest news out of redistricting in the primaries anyway is one Democrat knocking out another Democrat.
Right.
Because I think the Democrat as a party look to redistricting right now as giving them an opportunity to pick up some seats in this congressional delegation. They hope to get 2 seats, I think, out of this.
Well, and dovetailing on that is that Gwen Graham, who's sort of viewed as a Democratic rising star, couldn't run again for her congressional district because it got redrawn into a very conservative district, and she knew that if she ran, she probably wasn't going to win. So, I mean, it hasn't always worked out the way the Democrats had hoped.
Well, let's talk about things working out the way folks had hoped. So the Democrats faced more contested primaries than I've seen probably in 10 or 15 years in Florida. That was really the story before the last election. Now we roll in, and really it seems like your biggest fights at the state level now are going to be in the Senate level races. So let's start, why don't we start in Tampa? We've got Representative Young running for Senate. Who wants to take Dana Young's race? You want to take that?
That's again a redrawn district. Dana Young is a ferociously effective fundraiser, a well-known name. She's been the House Majority Leader, but she's running against a guy named Bob Busing, who is a self-funding guy, who's a lawyer, who's never run for office before. That district, among several we can talk about, the numbers are very close. And these races, Brad, are going to be affected, could be affected dramatically by the effect of the turnout in the presidential race. Right. Republicans are bracing themselves here because presidential elections for the last 2 cycles have favored the Democratic Party. However, the caveat is this: that's with the Barack Obama turnout machine. And we've yet to see whether or not Hillary Clinton can duplicate the level of turnout, because you're going to see just this avalanche of voters who only vote in November. And that's where we're going to see some of the effect of that turnout is in this Dana Young, Bob Busing.
Right. Well, we're going to go down to Miami, but I'm going to ask the 2 of you guys to split these 2 races up together. Jim, I'm going to ask you to talk a little bit about the Bullard or Tillis race. Talk to us a little bit about that dynamic, and then Mary Ellen, we'll come to you and talk about DLP versus JJR, the race of acronyms.
Mary Ellen's got all the good races.
Yeah, that's right. I'm giving you the fun ones,
so
though.
She gets all the fun. But yeah, in South Florida, in Miami-Dade, Frank Tillis is a House member running for the state Senate. He's running against Dwight Bullard, whose family has represented this area, or generally this area of Dade. For his mother was in the Senate, then he succeeded her. It was a really nasty primary that Dwight Bullard emerged from. He got challenged by Andrew Corge, who was well funded, and frankly there was a lot of accusations back and forth, even that he had offered $25,000 for Bullard to leave the race. I mean, there was a bizarre Miami-Dade politics stuff going on, and but Bullard emerged and he beat him pretty bad. And so this district has been redrawn though, and while it's Democratic performing district, it's got a heavy Hispanic population, which could help Tillis. The other thing Tillis is going to have is a ton of money. He already does have a ton of money built up. And the Republicans, I think, can play pretty heavily in pouring a lot more money into that race.
All right. So that race is in play. Let's talk about the acronym race. Mary Ellen,
yeah,
top points there.
Maybe it's better the race of the initials.
Yes,
right. The incumbent is Senator Miguel Diaz de la Portilla. He's been there for several years and comes from a family of many representatives, legislators, local elected officials, and he has been challenged because of redistricting, because his district now swings slightly Democratic, by a longtime House member who is Jose Javier Rodriguez. They're both really smart lawyers. They both have in the past voted similarly on some things, and so now we have this fight, and it is a fight to the finish. I think it's going to get It's going to be heavily financed. Both of them have raised money. I think Diaz de la Portilla is likely to raise more money as a Republican and the incumbent. And I haven't seen the sparks quite fly yet. We haven't seen the nasty stuff come out, but we will see it, I'm sure.
It's coming, it's coming. Okay, so that's the Senate. There's always a ton more House races we could talk about, but our time's getting a little short here. So we're going to do a quick round robin on predictions for the election, but I also want you to throw in where you think the marijuana amendment's gonna end, because that's always one that will typically be above the fold when we look at where it's covered. So why don't we go right to left? John, we'll start with you.
Predictions.
My right.
My prediction, I'll go with what would seem to be the favorite. Marco Rubio wins re-election to the U.S. Senate, and marijuana is approved for Florida.
Okay. Mary Ellen.
Yeah, you know.
By the way, predictions can be at either presidential or Senate.
Yeah, I will say the same thing. I think the hard one is going to be where things head on the Republican or in the presidential race. I'm kind of leaning toward Trump taking Florida. And I also think Marco Rubio is going to win. And I think both ballot amendments, the solar and the marijuana, are going to pass.
All right.
I agree with Mary Ellen on the presidential and Senate race. I mean, at this point, and we're a ways out, it looks like Trump has some momentum in Florida. Now, whether that'll change, I'm not sure. But I do think the medical marijuana amendment will pass, and I tend to think the solar one will pass too, although the environmentalists are going to probably raise a fuss in the next month or so.
Steve?
I think that at the moment, sitting here at this moment, with the way the polling is going, I too think that the election in Florida is going very, very slightly in Donald Trump's direction. And I'm less convinced that medical marijuana is going to pass, even though it's going to be a big turnout. There's going to be a big avalanche of anti-medical marijuana advertising. The opposition's well-funded. They're going to be running a lot of ads down the stretch saying this is bad, this is going to promote drug abuse and so forth. So I'm going to say no on medical marijuana and yes to Trump.
All right, well, that's all the time we have. Thank you for taking our viewers inside Florida politics, the title of this show, and we'll stay tuned for our next episode with these fine, fine leaders of Florida reporting. Thank you very much.
Thanks.